Well, Wes, we speculated last episode about all of the possible ways they'd fill 4 episodes when it felt like they had 2 episodes worth of story, and it's safe to say I did not think this would be one of them.
You didn't expect time travel?
Yeah, I did not have poor man's yesterday's Enterprise on my Star Trek Enterprise bingo card. Yeah,
that shows your Star Trek priorities, because I think this one, and maybe not just me, this is not a novel thing, but this is strongly reminiscent. This is E Squared we're talking about. Strongly reminiscent of Children of Men from DS9's 5th season.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Because they run into descendants of themselves and have a quandary that they have to face against. This episode is frequently compared against Children of Men. Yeah, go ahead.
That's Children of Men is the one where the Earth
Children
stopped
of Time.
having
I'm
babies.
sorry, not Children of Children.
Children of Men's the episode where Earth stopped having babies, except for Odo, who ends up pregnant.
Looking very tropical. Children of Time, not Children of Men, is the Star Trek DS9 episode. This one's kind of a hodgepodge of time travel stuff, though. Honestly, I think you could pluck a little bit out of everything, and it would end up where it was. But before we go to break, better or worse than the Detroit time travel episode?
Oh, much better. I think it's much better than the Detroit one. I think ultimately has about as much importance to the story as the Detroit one, but I did prefer this one to the Detroit episode.
About halfway through this one, I was thinking this episode should have been about Archie goes back in time and he goes to the Detroit version of the Xindi planet and he makes a biological weapon to stop the Xindi, and then they meet time traveling Xindi who go back and meet Archer, and the whole circle is squared or whatever.
And that's how they find common ground, because Xindi Detroit, very similar to Earth Detroit.
Yeah. We realize that post-industrial cities have a hard time. No matter where you come from in the galaxy, it's hard to maintain industry when it's cheaper to ship work overseas. Yes. Let's take a break. We'll play a clip from the episode called E Squared, and then we'll come back and we'll break it down.
The probe.
We couldn't stop it from entering the vortex. It's on its way to Earth.
7 million people.
Everything is happening as it did before.
Then you have no choice. You must find Jonathan Archer.
E Squared is the 21st episode of the 3rd season of Star Trek Enterprise. It came out on May 5th, 2004, 22 of 28 in the Xindi Crisis arc. Written by Mike Sussman, directed by Roxanne Dawson. In-universe dates specifically not known, but it's 2153, 2154, and 2037. In this episode, E Squared, an accident during an attempt to use a Xindi subspace corridor places the Enterprise in a bizarre confrontation with itself. That's it. E Squared. It's the shortest Star Trek title because the Memory Alpha considers the squared to be only half of a numeral, and there's a Q2 episode in Voyager, so they're saying that this is one half of a letter shorter. Okay. So this is the shortest one. I had to look up to make the text work.
We did it. Drop the banner.
E Squared, time travel episode. Very Children of Timey. There's a little bit of Dreadnought and Voyager. There's a little bit of All Good Things in some ways. That kind of a thing of looking back on yourself and stuff like that. They definitely. Well, I don't know if this is a good place to start with this one. Is the problem with this episode? Is one of the problems with this episode its placement in the season? Does this episode? I was trying to think. Does this episode work earlier? Because one of the flaws here is that we're delaying the final Xindi arc. Like after this, it's straight Xindi storyline. So this feels like a real stop. We mentioned at the end of the last episode where they even warned us we're going to go in that nebula. We're going to have an adventure. And this is what happened.
They set up the Nebula Pirates thing, and they only just briefly show up at the end. That's not the focus
people.
of it. Yeah. They didn't have anything left in the budget for new makeup, so they had to figure out how to shoot an entire episode on a second Enterprise.
Is this the placement issue?
I don't know, because the entire genesis of the episode is Enterprise needing to cross this final threshold in order to change the future. And if you put that earlier in the season, it doesn't really have the same zip to it. Like, it doesn't feel as urgent as if, like, they ran into this Enterprise midway through the season and I don't know, like, what's the... I mean, I guess you still could, because I guess there is something... I think the interesting part about this episode is Lorian talking about how they couldn't stop the weapon the first time because he hesitated too much. Like, I think that stuff works no matter where you put it. You can come up with some bullshit thing that they got to help them do or whatever. But yeah, I think you'd have to change some stuff. And I given what they actually are doing in this episode, it probably works better earlier, because it is a lot of just like interpersonal crew stuff. It's not really...
In some way, I think it's only Trip and T'Pol that's interpersonal crew stuff, and the Trip and T'Pol stuff is what I like the best of this episode, because that is that feels like the most recent developments in episodes like The Forgotten and stuff like that, and even Damage, where they're actually starting to be like, okay, let's see how this journey has affected these people and see where this is going. And even, I wouldn't say it saves it, but the revelation that T'Pol will not get better from her older self telling her that this is just the way it's going to be, you're going to have to suck it up and live with it. Mm-hmm. I still think that the way she became addicted to space crack is terrible, but at least they're sticking with this idea of like, this has permanently changed her, even if it was a silly decision in the first place. So I liked that, and I think that, you know, it works in terms of Trip and T'Pol sort of finally hashing out the fact that they had sex, and the fact that moving forward, like where do they stand, what's going on between them, T'Pol fighting back against it. I think all that stuff is good, and I think that it works. Where I think that the episode kind of falters, or did you want to touch on that before we go to the falter thing? Did you agree that you liked that segment, or did you find that not that appealing?
I did like that stuff, but I found it funny that they even say in a line of dialogue, Archer, when he's talking to, I think it's when he's talking to old T'Pol, he says, that seems like spending all that time with humans just rubbed off, or maybe it's Phlox, I forget who says. Somebody says that, and I'm like, that's it. That's all you needed to do.
Yeah,
you didn't have to addict her to space cocaine. Yeah. You know? But yeah, overall, I thought that stuff was good. The telling her she's not going to get better is interesting, because, you know, how does she reconcile that moving forward? Flagrant disregard for the space-time continuum in this episode, as far as telling people their futures and telling
except if you want to know how you die, then they're like, we can't tell you how you die. We'll tell you literally everything else, but not how you die. Yeah, that's always, that feels like an obligatory, this is a time travel episode, someone has to mention that they can't tell you something. A very Daniels-esque thing. But where do you stand on the T'Pol and Trip relationship at this point? Has this been okay of a storyline? I'm unconvinced as to whether or not this is good, but I didn't mind it in this episode. I don't know if the journey has been all that interesting for them, really, but I think you could say that about a lot of stories in this Xindi storyline. T'Pol seems... I don't think that they're doing this intentionally, but it's unfortunate. I understand that they have to do it because T'Pol's the Vulcan, so you have to change the Vulcan to make this storyline somewhat interesting. So to do this, they have to weaken the female character in this relationship, and they have to break her down to accept this male. And I don't think that this is inherently a bad thing. And again, they're doing it because T'Pol's Vulcanness is the thing that you have to crack to make this happen. Yeah, like Trip doesn't have any hang-ups about this stuff, so he can't be the one who's just like fawning after her or whatever. It does.
You could get away with, I'm from Florida, we can't be palling around with aliens. That works, right?
I thought he'd have some line about going to FSU, which is like the #1 most attractive women or something, according to those magazines every single year, and he'd be like, I've been many women, many tens in my life. You're nothing, T'Pol. Do you think is this, outside of the space crack, is this a damaging storyline to T'Pol, or are they earning what they're doing with her? Is this worth, are you getting the juice that's worth the squeeze, or whatever that saying is?
I don't know. I'm on the fence because I did find that this was another episode where they are doing a lot of tying up loose ends and like moving stories forward with time travel, which is not super satisfying to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the stuff between the two T'Pols works, and I think that's fairly satisfying. As far as the relationship with Trip goes, I feel like it clearly wasn't the focus of the season, because otherwise they would have leaned into it a lot more. But I don't think that they necessarily have to, because it is still fairly new, and it's kind of like baby stepping its way forward. And I think having T'Pol have these emotional problems is what's sort of like pushing it out the door a bit.
Yeah.
Which, again, I don't really think they needed to do that. But is it damaging to T'Pol?
Well, here's the thing. So compared to like other Star Trek romances, I'm thinking of one-off episodes like Lessons, where Picard falls in love with an underling on the ship, and then he has to put her in a dangerous mission, and then he's all conflicted because he's like, I can't function as the captain I need to be if I'm putting this person in danger all the time. To Dax and Worf's relationship, which had a lot of like modern commentary on jealousy and stuff like that coming from Worf. Down to Kira and Odo, which are kind of like a long pining relationship that eventually fizzles into like story-wise nothing, but they are happy as characters, which is kind of a strange thing. I just don't know what the angle is that this is shining a light on for me with this relationship. I don't know what all of those other relationships I mentioned, they kind of like, they give you an insight into some aspect of being in a relationship, or something that might be damaged because you're in a relationship, or something to think about at least. I don't really know what I'm supposed to think about this relationship, other than the fact that it would be nice if they got together, I suppose. But even if they get together, it almost seems like them getting together is just a salve for the fact that she's a crack addict at this point. And it's like, Trip is the way that you will be able... We know you love Trip, but Trip is just kind of like the medication that will allow you to get over the damage that you've done to yourself.
Right, yeah.
I don't know if that's insulting or boring, I guess.
That's the other reason why I don't like the time travel aspect of it, because it's just like, it's kind of written it in stone at this point. I mean, they don't even really... I mean, I guess maybe there's some lip service paid to... I actually don't even know if there is any lip service paid to, well... Who says we can't change? Who says the future's going to turn out the way that we think it is, or something like that?
No, they don't say that. Archer comes the closest when he says, "This is my mission. I'll do whatever I want."
Yeah, but like, you know, once you have your future self tell you that you're in love with, you know, your coworker, and that you're going to marry your coworker, regardless of whether or not you're stuck on a ship together for 100 years. Takes a little bit of the zip out of that relationship story, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's a strange counterpoint to Clone Trip, the Clone Trip episode.
Similitude.
Like, I almost wish that I wish that scene had been between old T'Pol and Trip instead of old T'Pol and herself.
Okay.
Because I feel like at that point it's kind of like even at that point, because, you know, T'Pol got to see Clone Trip open up some feelings that Trip wasn't afraid to say, and then, you know, Trip can talk to old T'Pol, and old T'Pol can be like, "Listen, you're doing the right thing. I need you now more than I ever needed you before." That kind of thing. So
yeah. I think the problem there is it takes that takes it away from. The one hook that this has, I would agree that's an interesting way to go, where they both get to look at each other's hand of cards, and then they know a little bit of information about each other, and that's what leads them to getting together. It feels a little bit juvenile in an interesting way. It's the kind of the passing notes in class about, do you like me or whatever, and they both get a yes on the notes, and then they're like, now we can be together. But I think the show thinks that the interesting aspect is T'Pol's dealing with emotions about this, and I think it's just a bad storyline to work up any kind of interesting plot dealing with the way Vulcans go about their life, really. Like, I think there are better stories that involve Vulcan's logic approach over emotion. This doesn't really feel right to me, because it feels she feels sick and being taken advantage of, and not taken advantage of, but like it doesn't feel as pure of a realization. It feels just like it's kind of like this character pairing will help you down the line. That just doesn't seem very romantic to me, or very even a comment on love or anything.
That's what I mean about it. Writing it in stone like that kind of takes any of the fun and revelation out of anything, because now it's just like, well, I guess we're getting together, so take them off.
Right, and the episode itself, they have multiple scenes where the characters talk about who they hook up with in the future and who they marry, and it doesn't...
Right.
I think one of the problems with this episode is that the reason it's not as good as Children of Time is that the descendants are almost inconsequential to anything. They only work in terms of the character stuff, but for the other characters like Hoshi, Mayweather, and Reed, it's just kind of a weird trivia revelation. They're like, oh, really? I'm shocked I married that woman. Maybe I should go talk to her. And it just seems like it doesn't seem like there's nothing interesting about that. I don't know if you remember the Children of Time episode, but the Children of Time episode...
I remember Odo looking like he just got divorced at age 70.
Yeah, lives in Miami.
2 weeks in Miami, yeah.
The brief summation of Children of Time is that the Defiant crashes. They find this colony where because of a time thing they've created this whole colony. If they leave and they don't crash the ship, the colony will be wiped from existence. If they do leave and they crash the ship, the society will continue to go on and on. The two characters who remain on it are Dax and Odo. Dax because he lives in multiple hosts, and Odo because he just lives forever because he's a changeling. Kira dies early, and the conflict there is that Dax tries to trick them into keeping the colony going. So she gives them bad information, and the end result, and the crew agrees that we will agree to sacrifice ourselves to keep this colony of 8,000 people alive. The way that the episode saves itself and hits the reset button is actually kind of brilliant character work, in that old Odo realizes that because he loves Kira so much, he won't allow Kira to die, and he'd rather kill the 8,000 people on the colony. So he allows the ship to leave, and that causes the colony not to happen. So this episode doesn't have anything on that level of interesting decision-making based on descendants that you have, because ultimately the descendants and the crew have the same goal in this episode, interestingly.
Right. Yeah. And if, Lorien makes a big deal out of saying that he's not willing to sacrifice his crew or something like that. And it's like, well, if you complete your mission, you guys get wiped from existence. Right? That's either...
Do you mean stop
Enterprise,
the Xindi or allow the Enterprise to survive, the original Enterprise to survive?
Either one. I mean, if whatever they do stops the Enterprise from going back in time, then they get wiped from existence. Because they say at the beginning, when they jump to old T'Pol, he comes in and says, the timeline hasn't changed. They must have failed, or some shit like that.
No, they failed. So the beginning cold open is they failed to destroy the sphere that made it to Earth and killed Florida, basically.
Oh, that's what that scene was?
That's what he's talking about. So at that point, she says, if that fails, you have to find Archer, because our backup plan is that we find Archer and convince him going forward what to do.
Oh, okay. I misheard the dialogue. I thought he was saying like something that Archer didn't change the timeline, and they were still regardless, they're still there. So if they complete their mission, then they're going to go away, as they do at the end of the episode, whether or not they get blown up or if they just get wiped from existence. But
fade off.
As T'Pol said, if they get wiped from existence, why do we still remember them? Which doesn't really bode well for the future of their mission. Yeah. So it's like you're taking that element out of it, which makes the descendants, like you're saying, just kind of like fun. But I do think that Lorien's problem is really interesting. His not being able to destroy the sphere because he didn't want to sacrifice the crew and stuff. I do think that works. I I don't know if he completely thought through, let's fire on the Enterprise.
I
so
just
we
keep
can
thinking
pull this
of
thing off.
That Arrested Development scene where George Sr. and his brother fight each other, and they're identical twins, so they're completely evenly matched, and they can't land a blow against each other. that's what that.
But again, like, if they, I'm assuming we're playing by the rules, yesterday's Enterprise rules, where if something changes in the past, it changes in the future. So, or
this
if they change
episode,
the future, well, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, this one doesn't really imply that because this ship has just been sitting around there for 100 years waiting for the Enterprise to come back. So it seems like it's had minimal impact on... honestly, I'll just say this now to get it out of the way. The original idea for this episode was that the ship that they stumble across is that NX-02 Columbia ship that they think it is at the very start when they see it.
Yeah.
So what happens in the original pitch is that the Columbia is sent out to help Enterprise, and it uses one of these tunnels to get out there quickly. But it does what Enterprise does in this episode. It shows up 100 years too early. And so the Columbia has to wait around for 100 years with its descendants that are going to meet up with Archer at that point and sort of help him at that. I don't know how that ends. And the executive producers, the senior producers decided that they wanted to make it the Enterprise that does that. Over objections, interestingly, of Mike Sussman, who said this is too close to Children of Time. But they overruled him and said that they have to do it this way. It's more interesting. But,
well, I mean, I don't disagree with the change only because, like, it makes it more interesting to have it be the Enterprise. I mean, it makes the character interactions a little bit more like who plays the T'Pol character in that original version. You know what I mean? Like, what's
I don't know. I don't know how they would build it. I don't even know what the fundamental conflict, if you don't do any character work, would be, unless the crew has gone insane or something. I think that what I like about the Descendants thing is really just the T'Pol, Lorian, and Trip storyline here. And I don't think that they even really focus on it all that much. Here's a question for you, though. What I think is most interesting about this, and that the episode, in my opinion, doesn't touch on, but let me know if I'm wrong, is that Lorian is kind of a stand-in for Archer in this episode, interestingly. All of Lorian's ideas and the things that he does are things that Archer has done this season. He steals the equipment that he wants to take.
Right.
He does a suicide mission, like Archer did when Archer tried to drive that submarine and bomb the Xindi base or whatever. He is extremely cocksure that what he's doing is the right thing, and there are no other alternatives. I think the biggest failure of this episode is I'm shocked that Archer does not realize he's looking in a mirror this episode and say, Lorian, this is everything I did, and none of this worked. So the problem to me is that while Lorian works in terms of T'Pol and Trip, I think this actually should have been the descendant of Archer is the captain, is Lorian at that point. And it's more of a...
Yeah, that might be a little bit too on the nose to do that. But
I don't think...
I know what you're saying.
I don't think this episode recognizes how similar, or at least Archer doesn't recognize how similar this is to what he's done. And this feels like the time in this season where Archer needs to see himself in the mirror and realize how things have changed since his initial opinion, or at least like give him the motivation to move into the final Xindi episodes with a different point of view about them. I think the younger version is the only one that does that. I understand why they had Lorian be the Vulcan, because they wanted to do the Trip and T'Pol thing. But Lorian, when that's done, leaves me... His motivation kind of feels like shit to me. He's just like, I promised you, Archer, that I would save those people. And it's like, well, I don't know. Don't these people have anything better to do than this? Like, they just wait around for this kind of thing? It feels a little bit flimsy to me if they're not going to go introspective on making this like a bloodline thing, or Archer sees himself in the mirror and recognizes his own flaws and can convince Lorian at that point of what's gone wrong or something like that.
Yeah, I think the mirror aspect still works even if it's not his descendant. Excuse me. But yeah, they don't really go into that at all. But I did notice that, like, they very specifically do the same thing that they did to that exploration vessel a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
until they get back at them by playing a very fun game of let's grab it with the transporter, which I didn't know you could do. I didn't know you could
which is interesting. It makes sense that they can
reach
do it
in
this.
and
They don't have shields.
pull out pieces. Yeah.
More effective than any torpedo.
Yeah, I know. Just start with that. Yeah.
But don't you think that's lacking? I'm just surprised because I don't know. I don't think it's
Archer
lacking, has anything to do.
Yeah, I do think it's lacking, but I don't necessarily think you need to make that change in order to do that story.
Sure.
It's, like I said, it might be a little bit too on the nose to have a descendant of his do the exact same. I mean, who knows? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I think given what they put down in this episode, the stuff that they did have, it was there. That sort of recognition from him was an option and should have been an option, but they never really go anywhere with it. They don't really have him have that moment of realization. I feel like he's been moving towards having that realization for like 6 episodes, and they never do it.
Well, this feels like the time because we're getting into the end game,
right?
So it feels
especially what the hell else? Why are we doing this kind of episode at this point in the season, unless it is to unearth or recognize the deep-seated truths of each character right before we head into the finale, you know?
Well, that would be my argument for if this was earlier, right, and everything that Lorien did is something that Archer then has the chance to do during the season, and he can call back to this episode and say, I was exactly just like them. Like, I need to adapt to be able to move forward. That feels like it's kind of giving away something, or it requires an incredible amount of forethought to have all of those Lorien tactics be replayed by Archer later on without him immediately realizing it or something like that. But the problem with Lorien, I think, is that the reason I would want the captain to be Archer's descendant instead of T'Pol and Trip's is because I think that the episode suffers here because so much of the story is put on Lorien's shoulders. And I don't think that that's appropriate for a guest star to do. I would have preferred if Trip and T'Pol's character, son, was just almost like a non-speaking role. They're just like, and this is Lorien. He's the son of Trip and T'Pol. And that's enough to trigger the conflict between Trip and T'Pol, you know? Because they don't spend any real time with Lorien. They have a couple scenes with him, you know?
Yeah.
I don't think they gain anything from talking to him a lot. It's more the idea that he can exist is interesting to those two. And it gets you around this sort of awkward Trip talking to him like, well, you're a good son. And he's like, well, I can't tell you how you died, Dad. And he's like, oh, that's too bad, son. Like, I hope we live on. And I don't think T'Pol talks to him about anything other than schematics about what the ship is doing. Like, she has no connection to him whatsoever. So I don't know why that character has to take up such a huge amount of time and serve both roles in that case.
Yeah. Well, I think it's because it's a Trip and T'Pol episode more than it is an Archer episode, and that may inherently be the problem. Because he does kind of serve both plots at the same time, which I mean, especially if it's nice to have Trip have that scene where he talks to him and stuff, but like, you don't even get a moment later on where Trip talks to him at the end or anything. You know what I mean? Like, there's no father and son moment when Lorien is trying to blow up the ship or whatever. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, that's my son. He's trying to blow us up. Yeah, it is Archer who's doing that. Having that conversation. So yeah, it is. I guess it does make it a little bit muddy to have him do double duty and not really have a focus for either one of those stories. It's probably not the best way to go.
I think that the descendant angle here is something that operates on like a familial thing of it's good enough to know that they're your family. Kind of like there's this there's a lot like. I just think that scripts like this tend to think that saying someone is your descendant is enough for there to be a relationship there and not just kind of like a weird, like, what kind of time shenanigans are happening here. It doesn't get into the fact that, like, would characters really consider these people to be descendants. Like in Children of Time, the conundrum was whether or not you kill these people. So it manages to get around the fact that they are your blood relatives in some timeline. It kind of ignores that because it knows that that's not really impactful in any way, because it's hard to imagine and you can't build any time getting to know them. But I think that this episode puts a tremendous amount on it, where even at the end, the reason the reason the Enterprise 2 doesn't kill the original Enterprise is they go, they're our family. We can't shoot at our family. And you go, I know they are, but I don't think this is strong enough to build this episode on. And I think Lorien falls into that, where Lorien, we don't know enough about this guy to really care about him in terms of Trip and T'Pol's relationship. All I care about is that he triggers T'Pol to realize that she has feelings for Trip and that there is a possible future between the two of them. And if Archer doesn't have a connection to him, Archer is just basically arguing with a guy who's being difficult to him. And that's not a very interesting plot line. He needs to have some kind of reflection during this of being like, I see the flaws in you that are in myself, but the show doesn't do that because typical Enterprise structure, we have a 10-minute action sequence to end this, and they can't do anything during that 10 minutes. So it's a tough one for me. I don't hate it, but I really see like critical flaws in this one that hold it back quite a bit.
Yeah, I think it's just got too much timey-wimey shit going on.
Sure.
Like you said, it's like four different other Star Trek time travel enterprises just kind of mushed together. And I think that's where these problems come from. Because if there was a stronger through line as to why they're doing this, what the purpose is, and what the because as we said before, like time travel is the purpose of time travel as a story mechanic is usually some sort of metaphor for something else, or and this doesn't really have that. It's just sort of like a bunch of stuff that's not really focused in any real meaning other than it's kind of interesting to do, and you've got a couple themes going on, but they don't really commit to any of them.
Yeah.
Because I think the stuff that they're messing with is kind of muddy and not really super defined. Like, are there rules? Like, what is at stake here? I mean, if Enterprise 1 blows up, does Enterprise 2 disappear? If so, why are they trying to blow Enterprise 1 up?
Shooting at it?
Right.
Yeah.
So I think some of that stuff makes it a little bit too muddy, and you could definitely streamline it by making some harder decisions about how this stuff works. And you having the thematic reason for having them meet their future descendants is a big, it's like a first page thing you got to figure out, like, why are we doing this? What are we trying to get out of this?
Yeah.
And I don't really know if it's totally there.
Yeah. I don't think it's clear. I don't think it's clear either about what and it obviously seems like it was tacked on as a way to make it more interesting. Is Enterprise bad at time travel, or is time travel at this point in Star Trek done? Do you know, like, is the franchise has the franchise done time travel to the point where there's like, I don't know what else you can really do with this, or is it just that Enterprise is, because Enterprise is, I would argue, the weakest of the storytelling Star Treks? Is it just because time travel requires you to have a much firmer grasp on storytelling to make it interesting that it's the problem here?
Yeah, I think so, because I think that's sort of similar to what I was saying a minute ago about, like, it's having a solid storytelling idea of why you're using this time travel mechanic, like, and what it's supposed to be for. That is is what makes those stories work.
Yeah. So you think it's an Enterprise specific problem instead of being a Star Trek problem at this point?
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably a little bit of both. Especially because this is so much of a retread of stuff they've done before. Like, if you can think of a new way to do time travel in Star Trek, then sure, go for it. But they're not reinventing the wheel here at all. It's just kind of a couple other things they've thrown together. Like, even Discovery, when they did time travel, it had the same problem, where it's, you come away going like, what? What the? Why did who? What was the point of that? Who was supposed to learn something? You know. So yeah, I mean, you come away from it thinking like, oh, that was kind of fun, but that's about it. It doesn't have. It has so much potential to be a little bit more effective, but still, even so, it's just such a weird thing to pull out. See, I think that's what makes it especially strange, and have the flaws kind of bubble to the surface even more is the placement. Because an episode like this, 4 episodes from the end of the season, when you're trying to pay off this season-long arc, you better have a damn good reason why you're sending people back in time at this point. You know what I mean?
It's interrupting. We've interrupted 3 very serialized episodes to have this one, and now we're going to close out with 3 serialized episodes to close this as well. So it's a strange, clunky episode right in the middle. But I mean, that's why I feel if you're going to do that kind of a placement, if you're going to take an episode that steps back from this heavy serialization story where you're literally interrupting Degra going like, Degra saying, go through that door, I'll see you on the other side in 2 episodes. And you go, well, what the hell are they going to do for this episode? The only way this makes sense to me is Archer's storyline has to be better than this. And the Trip into Paul storyline has to be the secondary storyline that's relegated to a sort of background thing that can continue onward. Archer,
because that's the thing, to sort of going off what you're saying before, making Lorien both the captain and T'Pol and Trip's son makes that the main story. Putting that character, Trip and T'Pol's son, in the prominent position of being the captain of the ship, by and large pushes the T'Pol and Trip stuff to the forefront. Yes. When it probably should be Archer who's at the forefront at this point.
I would think so, because the only reason to take this stall technique is to clearly identify that Archer has a revelation at this point. Mm-hmm. He's kind of been having it in the past couple we've talked about. He's much nicer to Degra and stuff like that, but there's still an ulterior motive that he has to convince Degra, so he can't be like, you son of a bitch. Like he has to play nice with him, at least, even if he's not fully believing it, but I don't think the show has shown that either. But this one should have been Archer focused. Archer runs into descendants that something like his current outlook that he never got past because of this failure to stop the Xindi and this bubbling hatred at the Xindi has led to an offspring that have a similar fire and brimstone outlook on things, that he is like, this is not the way this has to happen. It almost gives a reason to wipe them from the timeline in some ways, if they're more hostile or something like that. But they don't get into that, and because I think that they want to play up this family angle that these are your descendants and you have to care for them. And Archer's going to run and look at all the thousands of Denobulan children, or Denobulan, however the fuck you pronounce it. The Phlox has been siring all over the place. Archer not having a point in this episode outside of yelling at Lorien for getting in his way and trying to stop him from what he wants to do is not a good look for Archer at this point. And I think that's the critical flaw of this one, in my opinion, anyway. I know we've reached that ground. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the other reason that they make Lorien both the captain and the son of T'Pol, and see, I think this is where it doesn't matter if it's Archer's descendant, because I think one of the reasons they do that and have him be half Vulcan is because he is old enough to have been there when the rest of the crew was still there. So he would be old enough. Yeah, and Trip dies when he's fairly young. So you could make the argument that Archer is some sort of surrogate father to him in some sense. Not that they get into that, because they don't.
No.
That actually would have been kind of interesting if they did that a little bit, where he's like, Dad, and then he just runs to Archer instead of Trip. But so you can make the argument that that initial fire is present in him because he's the only one there other than T'Pol who remembers the first generation. Like everybody else in that ship doesn't give a shit, they don't know what the hell's going on. Yeah, they don't know. They don't know that they're flying in to try and blow this thing up and save the world. Or what's Earth to them? They don't give a shit.
Well, I
So,
mean,
like-
what's Earth to Lorien? Like, Lorien has a weird line in this where he argues with T'Pol in one scene, and he's like, "If this was Vulcan, you'd try to stop it." And it's like, what the hell are they talking about? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
that
I
they
think
were
it's-
just pushing too much on Lorien at that point. He's carrying too
Well,
much
I think the
story
important
weight.
thing, I think the important thing is with him is that he carries the first generation knowledge of why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And he has been around long enough to interact with Archer. But I think you could get around that if you did want to make him just fully human and have it be that this future version of the Enterprise has been working solely towards this purpose and like is very militarized because they've been trying to stick around long enough to get this done. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mako influence.
Yeah, right. But their whole thing, it's basically like they're split off from the timeline. It's like how it's like how when they go into the future in a lot of movies, it's always like the future of the place and time the movie takes place. So when Marty McFly, or when the movie's made, so like when Marty McFly jumps to 2015, he's seeing the future of 1989 when the movie was made. He's not seeing the future of what 2015 actually looks like. Like that kind of idea where it's like this future, this 117 years is like an Arrested Development kind of thing where they are still stuck in the mindset that Archer was at this point. And you can see how that's, influenced everybody. So then he can see, oh, this is not the way to be doing things.
Yeah.
I recognize what you're doing because I was doing it too, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll put a cap on that by just saying that even if they did that at this point in this season, I would still feel unconvinced by Archer because I don't think Archer has really had a through line where I'd be like, okay, this is. I think that's a way to fix this episode, and it feels like it's a workmanlike solution to have this be the revelatory episode for Archer. But I would still feel that Archer's arc this entire season has been incredibly strange and inconsistent. And I don't really know what Archer thinks, basically, at this point in the season. Like, I don't know if he's still antagonistic towards Xindi, if he's realized anything in himself. This is an entirely consistent Archer characterization because all 3 seasons have been Archer like, does he learn anything at the stuff that he does? Or is he just an idiot? And he just never has a chance to say anything. Or he never has a chance to state where he stands mentally. And I was surprised he didn't do it in this episode whatsoever, even because they have a scene where Lorien opens up about all of his failures, and back to his performance is just, he goes, And then he opens up the door and says, I need you. And it's like, what? Why? What's going on? This is bad. Yeah. I have a small point here. This felt like an incredibly dated episode in a way that was surprising to me because this came out in 2004, and other episodes like TOS at its worst when they're like, women don't have the intellect to be captains, and stuff in
they've done that they've done that twice with T'Pol specifically on this, so it's not that different.
It's a prequel, so it makes total sense in canon.
That's true.
TNG has all these weird sort of storylines about things like that. This came out in 2004, which is actually closer to TNG than it is to us, which is fascinating. But the point here is that all relationships in this universe are talked about on a heterosexual level, which is really awkward. And not awkward, it's like it sticks out like a sore thumb at this point, where Reed has no kids, and they don't go, "You're a homosexual, Reed." Like it's
we can't think of any reason why you might not have kids, Reed. Must just be because no woman would dare touch you.
But outside of Reed, all other relationships are only talked about in heterosexual terminology, which is it seems we've just come such a long way in television and stuff like that. Like it's just this is 2004, and it's only talked about. Men are asked what woman do you marry, and men are asked what woman are you going to marry. And when Reed's incredibly stilted, I don't know why I'm alone thing pops up, everyone goes, well, you're not finding the right woman, Reed. That's clearly what's gone on here.
The log said Reed just had a roommate that he lived with. But they were just friends.
It was just strange, and the show not floating any kind of like Star Trek-y like sexual relationship, not fluidity, but like options. It just I was really struck by it. I was like, wow, this feels more dated than the racist Code of Honor episode from TNG, just because of how recent looking it is, and you'd expect different things. But again, this was like 2004 was like the Supreme Court Republican backlash to gay marriage. Like that's what won Bush the election that year, was that wedge issue. Yeah. So it's of its era, I guess.
A lot has changed in the last 10, 15 years or so. Yeah, I mean,
because
like there's not even. Yeah, I mean, even more than that, there's not even a gay character on the ship at all.
No,
like
there's not.
That would you would take that as a prerequisite these days. And as you should. But it's like it's not even, like you're saying, it's not even touched
discussed.
upon, not even hinted
not
at, discussed. Yeah.
That's
you were hoping they were going to say that Reed's been living with Captain Hayes, right?
That would have we're going to get to a patron comment about this later, and I'm kind of stealing its thunder, but that would have been a remarkable Enterprise episode moment, right? If they're like, yeah, Reed's gay, like we came, we
it
arrived
would kind of
later.
Overshadow a lot of the episode, I think, if they did that. But that's not a reason not to do it.
No, it would have. And the reason, well, I mean, here's the thing: the reason that we have this there's this kind of joke about Reed being a closeted homosexual is because the show has given you nothing over 3 seasons to explain any of his tics or like his behavior or his choices and things like that. If they had fleshed out his character in a way that the show was like, oh, the reason Reed is like this is because he's such and such a person that will never settle down. This episode can't even identify a reason why a heterosexual would remain single and without children in a ship that is designed to be generational. They want you to breed on the ship.
Right.
And he's just like, don't know. They don't have a scene where Hoshi's like, we'll read it's because you're an incredible narcissist who would never be able to do it. It's such a weird thing. I wish
they had done like the Simpsons episode where Simpson befriends John Waters. And Hoshi's like, yeah, I just don't know what's going on. You never found a wife. And then Mayweather can be like, he prefers the company of men. She's like, well, who doesn't?
That's the rest of the season. A lot of jokes at his expense, and it feels weird. To be clear, it's not. It comes off as ribbing him for being gay, but it's really I'm making fun of the fact that his characterization is so bad that it's like, what else is going on with this guy? And it feels like the show is. Honestly, it feels like the show is aware of it, but the show is too cowardly to do anything about it. It's just like, he's just this way, I guess. I don't know. We can't explain it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, like you're saying, it is just an interesting relic of the past that they would rather have him be an inexplicable bachelor who apparently just can never find the right gal. Than to imply that or explicitly say that maybe he's a homosexual.
Yeah, on a ship where everyone else got paired up, and I would imagine because there's like 3 men to 1 women. I feel to keep their genetics going, they almost need to have multiple plural marriages or something because they need genetic stock to be.
Well, they got a bunch of aliens in there.
They do. Maybe that
got
washes
some new
the clean.
alien crew. Yeah, yeah.
We picked up random aliens,
what,
and you had sex with all of them, John Archer.
It's like 70-something people now after the last battle. A bunch of people got sucked out.
Yeah, about 30 of them died. There's about 70 left, yeah.
So 70 people for 100 years.
They don't have to survive that long, I guess, is the out here, where you don't need a lot of genetic variability in it, and maybe introducing 1 alien is enough, but they called it a generational ship. The implication here is that everyone is doing things, but except for Reed, who blankly stares at his casserole that he gets out of the food replicator or something, doesn't know what's going on.
The weird part about that scene, too, is the way it ends, not only does Reed come over and then Hoshi and Mayweather immediately leave.
Yeah.
They're just like, ooh, the single guy. We don't want to hang out with this loser. And they just get up and take off.
Yeah.
But then this female crew member comes around the corner and he's like, you can sit over here. And then they just like hard cut. It's a really weird.
He just goes for the first woman.
Know.
First woman possible.
Yeah, is that? I'm not totally sure if there was supposed to be a joke there or something or what, but.
I would have thought it would have been ballsy of the show for that woman to go, no thanks, and just walk away and Reed, and you'd be like, well, okay. Like Reed's giving off some energy or something. But the implication there is that she sits down, but they don't show it, and I don't think they're going to touch on it. Before we go to final thoughts, Hoshi does not look up who she married. She looks up how many kids she has, which is interesting, but she doesn't look up who she married. Travis does look up. What would you do in this situation?
I feel like I would probably go the Hoshi route.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if I would want to know, because then that puts too much pressure on shit, if you know who it is.
I would want to know, but I would never be able to marry that person if I learned about it. You know?
So you would instantly change the future.
I would alter the future.
You would want to know, but then you'd be like, ugh, no.
That's power right there. Dude, that would be, like, if people ask, like, how you got together, you'd be like, well, I met my time-traveling descendants who said that this just has to be the way, and so, therefore, this is the relationship that I'm in. I would like to know, though, just to see what would be possible in some post-apocalyptic future timeline or something.
You know what I would do? I would have somebody write it down and put it in an envelope, and then I would keep it, and then I would open it up however many years later as I'm getting married or something and be like, oh, I changed the future, or, oh, interesting. It was all correct.
If you think that time travel is fate, right, and that things have to work out the way that the time travel implies, you save a lot of money on condoms.
That's a good point. Yeah. Well, I mean, then that's where you get into a paradox, though, because like if you are, it's fate only if a certain bunch of things happen in the right order, right? So if you change the order, or introduce another variable, which is blatant disregard for safe sex. Well, to be fair, they never say how many kids that they have. They just said, or all of them specifically, or who they're with. It's
sure.
Just
well, I guess I'm basing it on. I don't think this episode does, but the time travel where you can't escape the future. Like if you try to stop it, it'll just find some other way to work out so that is what happens. That's my thinking there, but I don't think Star Trek cares about that kind of time travel. Let's take a break. We'll play another clip from the episode, which is E Squared. We'll come back, read some Patreon comments, and give our final thoughts about E Squared.
You wouldn't understand. You can't. You don't know what it's like living with the responsibility. Millions of people are dead because of me.
I'm sure your crew did everything they could to stop the probe.
I could have destroyed it. Years ago, I swore to my captain on his deathbed I'd save those 7 million lives. You were the man I made that promise to.
Thank you very much for listening, everybody. Thank you for supporting the show. If you enjoyed the content today, you can support the show at patreon.com/thepenskyfile. It's the best way to support us. A couple dollars a month, you get extra stuff, extra podcasts, extra polls to decide what we talk about in those podcasts. You get there's occasional live streams. There are the Discord access for captains only. You get exclusive Discord channel access. Early access, that's basically what that leads down to. So if you want early access to the podcast shows, you become a Patreon supporter. And as always, a special thank you goes to our Captain Tier supporters, who are Tarek Latif, Samuel Custer, Joint Mango, Kyle Barrett, Mike Burnett, Andrew Turlog, Matt Ross, Michael Pond, Christian Pouch, Matt Cutler, Nick Sergey, Grim Santo, Sean, Cardinal Doomsday, Bradley Killens, Dwayne Hackett, Kevin Reyes, Fall 13 Hero, Jordan Cooper, Russell Elledge, Darth Mosk, HH28, Stefan Minton, Derek Zajac, Paul Roscoe, Jake 123, Point Extra G, Patrick Seba, Dave Davies, Johnny Franceschi, Captain Brazen, Eric Sanjuan, Jakey's Gamer, Kevin Lowry, Corey Martin, William Scheisler, Nick the Rat, Rayhan Jaffer, Grappo John Zoin, Soylent Blue, Zane Majors, Olivia Pardew, Retail, Tom Hickey, Jose Hunter, ZWNF Remixes, Captain Munchausen, James McLennan, Beal, Jonas Lokai, and Tommy Tango, Tuvix Must Die, and Chris McLaughlin. Thank you very much for supporting us, everybody. We're $1 short of the Voyager goal again. We lost a couple patrons, so if you want a security
because
blanket,
you didn't like a Star Wars movie.
I did.
Why.
We had a patron leave, and he said it was because I didn't like The Last Jedi. No, I do like The Last Jedi. I can't remember. I just trolled Star Wars
yes,
people.
it's that you did like you did.
He might
like
have been joking, but I do like The Last Jedi, and he or she found that an unbearable opinion. At least that's what they wrote on the patron feedback. But thank you for your support before you left. It's much appreciated.
Yes.
Even if you had to change going forward. I don't take it personally. My opinions about The Last Jedi. I take losing patrons very personally. What are we doing now? We'll read some patron comments, patron thoughts. You can leave your thoughts about upcoming episodes. We read them. Here's the first one. Matt Ross says, E squared. I guess this is Enterprise's Children of Time from DS9. Deadlock from Voyager, and even the time travel conundrum of All Good Things from TNG. The fact that the Enterprise alternate still exists doesn't truly make sense, but whatever. The children of this temporal paradox are interesting to watch, even with T'Pol's old age makeup. The look of Enterprise has got a wavy deflector dish and flashy lights on the bridge. It was good to finally see Archer not being so trusting and finding out that Phlox was a real sex machine. Reed, not so much. The battle with the two Enterprises was a bit silly, as was Archer's obstinance and realization that this means nothing and just wasted more time to fill a TV order. 3 out of 5. I had a hard time. Time travel played trickery on me here, where I kept expecting the duplicate Enterprise to be more advanced because it was bulkier. You know, when I see, and I kept feeling like they must destroy them with their futuristic weapons, but no, they've just been hanging around for another 100 years. They haven't gained anything in that time. They gained some tech.
Well, they got
a
a tractor beam.
They got a tractor beam.
Or do they?
Yeah.
I
think that's the first time I've ever seen
beam
it.
Yet?
Yeah, I think that's the first time I've ever seen it used.
Because the original one's still using the grappling hook.
The grappling hook. I wonder if they start using the tractor beam after this. No, they call it a tractor beam, so I don't know. Mm-hmm. Royo says, DS9's Children of Time is one of my favorite episodes. E Squared, despite sharing its premise, is one of my most hated episodes of Star Trek. E Squared comes out of nowhere in the Xindi arc with no setup, and a reptilian asking how many Starfleet vessels there are in the Enterprise is not foreshadowing, as he would have been asked that regardless if this episode even existed. I'm going to stop there. This was a good example of continuity that is not necessary and should be stripped from scripts, where Archer's like, the Xindi had been saying that they thought there were more ships around, and the woman on the other Enterprise goes, yeah, they probably saw us a couple times. Sorry. It's like the Xindi are basing their idea that there are multiple ships on the fact that they saw this ship one time. That's ridiculous. That's absurd.
Sure is.
The Xindi would do that. This episode immediately breaks my
They're
suspension.
seeing double. 4 Enterprises.
My suspension of disbelief, as the Xindi arc had already established that Enterprise is being watched over by the temporal agency, which would not let Enterprise be stranded 100 years in the past to do all kinds of damage to the timeline. Yeah. And not once in the 72 previous episodes is there even a hint, rumor, tale of a mystical ghost Enterprise existing on the frontier before humanity's first deep space mission exploration. I fucked that up, but I'll continue. Julian Blaylock executes what can only be described as a parody of what young people think old people are, much like Season 1's TNG's Too Short a Season, where they act like no old person I've ever met. While not as painful to watch as Carpenter Street, in many ways this episode is worse since the concept isn't even plausible, episode doesn't change anything, and the showrunners were too afraid to tackle the topic of male relationships on a generational ship with 2/3 of the crew being men, make it a giant waste of time. 0.5 out of 5.
Damn.
Yeah, I don't have any... I mean... Daniels at this point doesn't even register to me as a plot problem because he's awful in general. Like his existence is a plot problem to this the show and the series. So here specifically, I think he makes a good point. Romy makes a good point, but Archer doesn't even cross my mind in situations like this anymore.
Because by the logic of this episode, that second Enterprise is already out there when Daniels has been contacting. Yeah.
Daniels should know about it, right? There's no reason Daniels shouldn't know about this ship,
right? Because if that ship is out there, that means that they never started the Federation. So there's
or
Daniels
it's just
shouldn't exist. Well,
so Archer and T'Pol talk about it, so they know that its knowledge has been retained. Archer is presumably going to report on this, which means that Daniels would know that there is a time-traveling ship because it's been reported on by Starfleet at this point, and they haven't changed the timeline in the past yet, I would think. I don't know. It's irrelevant, but Daniels sucks. Latte Librarian says, despite the old age makeup and paradoxes, this was a pretty good episode. Lorian was convincing as half human, half Vulcan. Wish they'd shown more of an alternate ship and the culture and community they'd created. It would have made it all the more sad when they don't appear again. 4 time jumps out of 5. What do you think of Blaylock's performance this season? I don't think we've talked about this yet. From her emotional outbreaks to the drug addiction to this episode.
I don't know if she's just put in a tough position given what she's being asked to do, which is play someone who doesn't have emotions but is also having a tough time because they've got all the emotions. It's a little bit abstract to try and play that. So that is a little bit I don't know if it's her being in that tough spot or if she just doesn't super have the range to cover it, because like I don't really like the way that she plays a lot of the emotional stuff, because it just kind of translates into like her eyes go big and she starts to like shake a little bit when she talks. And I mean, old T'Pol, it was fine. It was. I wasn't really expecting that much.
I didn't think the wasn't as bad as Jameson in that TNG episode where he was a Muppet. He was like, I'm an old man, wheeling around in his wheelchair, like bumping into the wall and stuff like that.
They did a great job with the split screen thing with both of them on screen at the same time, though. I thought that looked really
good. Talking to each other. Yep. I think Blaylock's better than the material. My concern here is that I think that the toughness of her position comes from the fact that, as you're saying, they want her to be an emotionless person who is trying to constrain emotion. My real problem with all of the space addiction and emotional outburst stuff is that she's been acting extremely emotional in a way that the other characters should be talking about constantly. What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with you? Why are you talking like this? And no one seems very concerned about it whatsoever. But because it's a not subtle Star Trek show, she has to be like, Captain, you can't do this, and it's like, this is not good, but it's not her fault because there's no way to portray what they want her to do in this show.
I feel like when they were shooting Carpenter Street, she was on a break and she asked Leland Orser for some acting advice on how to handle this, and he's like, well, if you just shake and you kind of shuffle your way through and you say that he made you fuck her, it should work.
I'm looking forward to that episode. I think she's better than this. She's not a great actress, but she's better. She's been given the hardest mission of this crew to do this job, and I don't think it's particularly fair.
I think part of that, I think a big part of that is like it's so unclear. Like there was no clear motivation for it until they came up with this bullshit drug thing. Like it's just
chasing
like
emotion.
Yeah. There's no like arc for her to look at as to like what's going on with T'Pol this season. Well, she's doing something. Well, no, this episode she's acting kind of nuts. This one she's fine. This one she's got a crack addiction. This one she's old.
Right. Yeah. Agreed. Cal Barrett says, E Squared, an episode reminiscent of Children of Time, but not quite so gratifying, although I do like the smaller scale of this one with everything contained to the ship, because creating a colony the size of the one in DS9's episode would require more incest than the front page of Pornhub. The big issue here is that the drama should be surrounding the characters on our Enterprise, not the guest stars who are going to disappear at the end of this episode. It too often places the focus on Lorian when his appearance should only be the catalyst to explore T'Pol and Trip. The scene between the two T'Pols is easily the best in the episode, and it's such a shame that there aren't more moments like that. And while I often use Reed's suspected homosexuality as a joke, him realizing he had fathered no children could have been a genuinely brilliant sci-fi tinged way for him to come out and accept his life as a gay man. 3 Lord of the Rings references out of 5.
I was really, not surprising. I was really kind of surprised that they didn't do a scene with old T'Pol and Trip. Maybe that kind of like takes the win. Did I already say that earlier? I don't remember. But
you did say that earlier, but you didn't go into it outside of just them sharing a hand of cards.
Right.
T'Pol has a thing where she's like, well, it would be kind of awkward if I saw him. And Archer's like, yeah, I guess that's true. I guess I shouldn't tell him to come see
me. Yeah, I don't know. It seems like it would have been kind of a nice scene for them to do, but I understand that it's more about T'Pol than it is about T'Pol and Trip, really. So,
but my problem with it is that old T'Pol has clearly come to terms with her emotions and stuff like that. I feel like old T'Pol would want to see Trip. And I don't understand her motivation to not see him, really, outside of if she's old enough where she would be at acceptance of this is the way that things have to be. It's not like we're going to be together or anything like this, but it's nice to see you one last time.
Yeah.
I don't really understand her motivation to not interact with him. And unless they think that it'll spoil what this storyline is supposed to be, because old T'Pol would not be able to control her telling the truth to him, something like that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Christian Pouch says, E squared, what a strange, very short, cold open. I kind of wish it had been the post-intro scene with Trip and T'Pol because I really liked how natural and real that scene felt. Nick the Rat says, final comment, T'Pol changed into Yoda, she did. Malcolm marries a pineapple and Phlox fucks. Knowing Trip has a kid with T'Pol brought a tear to my eye, I bet T'Pol still doesn't believe in time travel. It's true. If only Archer showed just ends an episode with I still don't believe in time travel.
She's gone through quite a bit in this season. falling in love with Trip, falling in love with Trip's clone, getting addicted to freebase rock, finding out about time travel, meeting herself
repeatedly
in the future, finding out she's got kids. It's a lot.
You can understand why she's shaking. If only Archer showed the Xindi Daniels' room, they wouldn't need much more convincing. The serialization of the show seems to be working very well. It's making me want more. 4 out of 5. Oh, there's 3 more episodes to go, and then we're done with the Xindi season. Thank you very much, patrons, for leaving your thoughts about it. E squared. Clay, what are you going to give this one on a scale of 1 to 5?
I'm going to give it a 3. So I think it's fine. I like it. I think it suffers from a lot of problems that the show has, which it's a bunch of mishmash down the middle of other stuff that isn't really doing anything spectacular with it. It's just kind of serviceable. The placement's kind of weird. The story they're telling doesn't seem I get being sort of the bridge between 2 sets of 3-parters. Essentially, it makes sense to do kind of like a come down episode for a minute, but I don't think you're really getting much out of it. Like, if you're going to do that, you should get something out of it. And I don't really think they do in this.
Clay goes at a 3. I'm going to give it a 2. I think it has too many conceptual problems with it that really hold it back. I don't think that Archer's story is good. I think Archer's story needs to be good. I think that Lorien is asked to shoulder too much of the narrative burden here, which is distracting from what's going on the Enterprise. I don't think that they get any pathos out of the descendant angle. That's not anything sort of interesting and hard-hitting to me. I don't think that there's nothing emotionally resonant about that storyline that's not just like, oh, this is technically cute that they've met their descendants and this is the way the storyline's going to go. I think it's a 2. I think it has too many problems to be a good episode, and it's better than Carpenter Street, but Enterprise, I think Enterprise is specifically bad at time travel stories. Yeah. From the temporal Cold War to Carpenter Street to this is just like, well, they just don't. Yeah. They don't want to do time travel at all.
Yeah. Well, no. The problem is they do a lot want to do time travel.
Sure. Yeah. They did a lot of time travel this season, right? How many time travel episodes? Was it just the 2? Was it just Carpenter Street and this, or was there another one in there somewhere?
Do you count the one where
Twilight,
the one where Archer, has Alzheimer's or something?
Yeah, so they did 3 in 20-something episodes. Seems like a lot.
Do you? I was just thinking, isn't it kind of weird that the community on Enterprise 2 is like thriving?
Yes, it is weird.
You know, like doesn't it feel like to drive home the point a little bit more, they should be like bare bones, just getting by.
They should be desperate. The desperation should come across in their need to stop this mission from happening. They've lived a horrible, cramped existence, waiting 100 years for this ship to show up, and they have to stop this thing from happening, and they're religiously driven by it. You know?
Yeah. What if if they were doing it that way, you could kind of flip it on Children of what's it called? Time, and have someone pull Lorian aside and be like, "Hey, do we really need to do this? Like, what happens if we just take their ship?"
Right.
You know, like what happens if we decide to live our own lives instead of waiting to live theirs or something, you know?
We don't know anybody from Earth. We've never been to Earth. What do you care about Earth? That was the weakness of Lorian's. If this was Vulcan, you'd care. Because Lorian doesn't know anything about Earth either.
We have this language. It's built off of a certain document that says "We the people." Of the United States of America.
I enjoyed the recent Fourth. A lot of people posting those quotes from that very patriotic episode of Star Trek. Thank you, patrons, for leaving your thoughts about E Squared. I give it a 2. Clay gives it a 3. We're heading into the final arc of the Xindi episodes. Here we go. The next one is called The Council, I think. Archer makes it to the Council after this
wonder what that's
stop
about.
off. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Thank you very much, patrons. Thank you, listeners. Everybody, thank you for supporting the show. Next one's The Council. Clay, do you have anything you want to say before we head out?
Thanks for checking out Rotten Horror Picture Show. We've got Audition up, and then after that we've got Quiet Place Part 2, and then we'll be doing our next wild card, which I think is Jennifer's Body, which should be fun. And we're continuing going through Friday the 13th on Patreon. In July we will be doing Friday the 13th Part 7, where Jason is an uber zombie who fights... basically Carrie from the movie Carrie. She's got telekinetic mind powers, so it gets pretty weird. So join us. And Badass is continuing. We've just recorded past the halfway point, so it's a shorter season for Badass this year.
Yeah, and this month, I think this comes out in July, so this month's Patreon stuff for us would be a Star Trek rewatch, which I think is going to be... No, I can't say it at this point. Can I say it? Has it closed out yet? Well, it's going to be... was the movie Flash Gordon. So we did 1980s Flash Gordon. And we will be doing... that was the other one. Sorry, I'll look it up now. I think someone's in the lead. It looks like it might be in The Children Shall Lead. It's either in The Children Shall Lead from TOS or it's Lessons from TNG. They're pretty close to each other. So it's one of those two. It's out this month. Thanks very much for listening, everybody. Thank you for supporting the show. We'll see you later.